He built an empire on silence and left without a word. She built a life from the wreckage and raised his son alone. Now Marco DeLuca is back in New York, and the boy with his eyes just looked up at him from a hospital hallway. Some men run from what they've done. Some men get to run twice. Marco DeLuca is about to find out which kind he really is. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and follow so you never miss what happens next. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The rain came down hard over Manhattan that Tuesday. The kind of rain that didn't care about your plans or your umbrella or the fact that you had somewhere important to be. It hit the pavement outside JFK like a punishment, and Marco DeLuca walked through it without flinching, his black coat soaked through at the shoulders before he even reached the car. He didn't run. Men like Marco DeLuca didn't run from weather. They didn't run from anything, or so he had spent 5 years convincing himself. The driver, a thick-necked man named Caruso, held the door open without a word. That was the thing about the people who worked for Marco. They understood silence. They had learned to read the space around him the way sailors read water, not by what was on the surface, but by what moved underneath it. Marco got in. The door closed. The city swallowed them whole. He had not been back to New York in 4 years. London had suited him. London was clean in the way that mattered, meaning the people who needed to stay invisible stayed invisible. The money moved where it needed to move, and nobody asked questions they couldn't afford the answers to. He had expanded the DeLuca network across 3 boroughs of that city before most people in those boroughs even knew his name. That was how he liked it: quiet power, invisible architecture, an empire you could feel but never touch. But his mother had called, not through the usual channels, not through Vincent or through the lawyers. His mother had called his personal cell at 6 in the morning London time, and when Elena DeLuca called a number directly, it meant the situation had already moved past the stage where messengers were useful. "It's your uncle," she said. "Dominic is in the hospital. They say it's his heart. Marco, come home." His uncle Dominic was 71 years old and had smoked 2 packs a day since he was 17. The heart attack was not a surprise to anyone except Dominic himself, who apparently still believed his body operated on a different set of rules than other men's bodies did. But Dominic was also the man who had raised Marco after his father went to prison when Marco was 9. Dominic had put him in good shoes and kept him fed and taught him how the world actually worked. Not the version taught in schools, but the real version. The one where power was the only language that didn't lie to you. Marco owed the man everything, so he came back. The car moved through Queens toward Manhattan, and Marco watched the city through the rain-blurred window like a man watching footage of something that had already happened. He knew these streets. He knew the weight of them. But something felt different now. Not the city, but the fact of him being in it. Like a coat that used to fit and now pulled wrong across the shoulders. He told himself it was just the travel. 12 hours of flying did things to a person. He told himself a lot of things on that ride. Meridian General Hospital sat on the Upper West Side, 13 stories of glass and pale stone that managed to look both institutional and almost compassionate from the outside. The kind of building architects designed when they understood that the people going inside were scared and needed to feel like the building was rooting for them. Marco had never been inside it before. He had dealt with hospitals twice in his adult life. Once when Vincent took a knife across his ribs in a dispute that got settled before morning, and once when Marco himself caught a bullet in the shoulder at 24 that they dug out in a private clinic in New Jersey where nobody asked for insurance information. He had no relationship with legitimate medicine. That had always been fine. Caruso dropped him at the main entrance, and Marco moved through the sliding glass doors into the controlled climate of the lobby, past the reception desk and the information board, and the smell of antiseptic that hospitals never managed to fully hide beneath the cleaning products. He followed the signs to the cardiac unit on the 7th floor. His mother was already there. Elena de Luca was 63 and looked it the way certain women look their age. Not diminished by it, but carved by it, like a face on a coin. She stood when she saw him, and there was something in the way she moved toward him that reminded him suddenly of being young, of a version of himself that still believed being held by someone could fix the broken parts. He let her hug him. He did not pull away quickly. "He's stable," she said. "They say he needs surgery. Day after tomorrow if his numbers stay where they are. What kind of surgery? Triple bypass. She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady but tired in a way that went past the last few days. You look thin. I'm not thin. You look like you haven't slept. I slept on the plane. She touched his jaw with one hand, the way mothers do. Not asking permission, just doing it, because they earned that right in ways you stopped being able to calculate. You should have come home sooner, she said. He didn't answer that. They sat with Dominic for an hour. The old man was conscious, annoyed at the tubes and monitors attached to him, and made 3 separate complaints about the food before Marco had been in the room for 10 minutes. That was reassuring. Men who were about to die didn't complain about food. Men who were about to die got quiet. You came all the way from London for this? Dominic said, looking at him from behind the oxygen cannula. Yes. I'm not dying, you know. I know. Your mother overreacts. She didn't overreact. Your heart stopped in a restaurant. Dominic waved a hand. It restarted. That's not a defense. The old man looked at him for a long moment, the way he used to when Marco was a teenager and had said something that revealed more than he intended. That particular look had always made Marco feel like he was made of glass. It still did. You look like something's sitting on you, Dominic said. I'm fine. I didn't ask if you were fine. I said something's sitting on you. Marco said nothing. Dominic let it go. That was one of the things Marco had always respected about him. He knew when to push and when to let the silence do the work. They left around 7 in the evening. His mother insisted on dinner at a restaurant nearby. Marco ate because his body needed fuel, not because he was hungry. He answered her questions about London with enough detail to satisfy her without actually telling her anything real. She asked if he was seeing anyone. He said no. She said nothing to that, which was its own kind of commentary. He checked into a hotel on the west side that he had used before. Not flashy, not the kind of place that attracted attention, but clean and quiet and staffed by people who understood that certain guests preferred their check-in processed without extensive conversation. He slept. Or he tried to. The city outside the window had a sound to it even at 3 in the morning, a kind of low-frequency hum that was different from London's nighttime silence. New York never fully went quiet. It just changed registers. He lay in the dark and told himself he was here for Dominic. That was the whole of it. In the morning, he went back to the hospital. His mother arrived an hour after him, and by 10 o'clock, Dominic was being moved to a different room on the same floor for additional monitoring. The process involved orderlies and equipment and the quiet, organized chaos of hospital logistics. And Marco stood back and let it happen the way men like him always stood back from things they couldn't control through direct force. He did not like hospitals. He did not like anything that reminded him that the human body was breakable in ways that money and power couldn't always fix. He walked. Not far. Just down the corridor to get out of the room's particular gravity. He passed nurses and orderlies and visitors carrying flowers, and he kept moving until he found a section of the hospital he hadn't been to, a wing that connected through a set of double doors with a different energy to it. Brighter colors on the walls. Murals. He pushed through before he registered what he was looking at. The pediatric oncology ward. He stopped. The hallway was lined with paintings of animals and geometric patterns in yellows and blues, and small frame drawings that looked like they had been made by children's hands. The lights were softer than the rest of the hospital. Somewhere down the corridor, a child was laughing at something, a genuine full-body laugh, the kind that doesn't understand what it's living inside. Marco started to turn back, and then he heard a voice, not loud, not raised, but precise in the way that certain voices are precise, the kind that cuts through ambient noise because it knows exactly what it's doing, exactly where it's going. His counts are better than last week, which means we keep the current protocol and we do not panic. You understand me? We don't panic. We watch, we adjust, and we move forward. He turned. She was at the nurse's station about 30 feet away, a tablet in her hand, wearing a white coat over dark scrubs. Her hair was pulled back, natural, and there were reading glasses pushed up on her forehead that she clearly kept forgetting were there. She was talking to a woman who was clearly a patient's mother. He could tell by the posture, That particular collapse of the shoulders that parents get when they have been holding themselves together for too long, and finally someone official has spoken to them with something approaching confidence. Marco's body stopped before his mind did. That happens sometimes. The body knew things faster. Lila Hart. He said her name only inside his skull, and even there it landed with a weight he hadn't prepared for. A weight he would have said he didn't carry anymore if anyone had asked, because he had told himself so many times that he didn't carry it that he had come to believe the telling. But the body doesn't lie. His chest did something specific that he couldn't name and didn't want to. She hadn't seen him. She was still talking to the woman, her voice measured, her hands moving slightly when she spoke the way they always had. That particular habit of hers, thinking with her hands. He watched her for a moment that felt longer than it was. She looked different and exactly the same. Older in the way that meant something had happened to her, not just time. There were things behind her eyes now that hadn't been there at 25. He could see that from 30 feet away. He should have turned around. He knew that with absolute clarity. He had not come to New York for this. He had not come for her. He had not let himself think about her in, he counted backwards, 4 years, 3 months, and some number of days he refused to calculate exactly, because the precision would have convicted him of something he wasn't prepared to be convicted of. He should have turned around. He didn't. And then a door opened at the far end of the corridor. A boy came out, 4, maybe 5 years old. Dark hair, slight. Moving with that particular unself-conscious energy that small children have, all kinetic forward momentum, carrying a small paper airplane that he had clearly made himself because one wing was longer than the other and the nose was slightly crushed. He was making engine sounds under his breath. He ran to Lila. She looked down at him immediately. The reflex of a parent, the attention that doesn't need to be triggered, just exists. She caught him with one arm without breaking the sentence she was finishing with the other woman, and the boy showed her the airplane with enormous seriousness. And she looked at it with equal seriousness, because she had always been that kind of person. She gave everything she looked at her full attention, even paper airplanes with crooked wings. Marco watched the boy. He watched the dark hair and the angle of the jaw, and the way the boy held his head slightly to the left when he was thinking, which Marco knew because he had just watched it happen. And that tilt, that specific tilt, was the same tilt Marco had seen in photographs of himself at that age, in pictures his mother kept in a box that he hadn't looked at in years. The floor did something, or he did something, he couldn't tell which. He reached out without thinking and put one hand flat against the wall beside him, not dramatically, just steadying, just maintaining vertical. The boy looked up from the airplane. Children do that. Their attention is radar, not searchlight. It sweeps rather than focuses, and in sweeping it found Marco standing at the far end of the corridor. The boy looked at him for a moment with the uncomplicated directness that children have before they learn that looking at strangers is rude. Lila felt the shift. She looked up. Their eyes met across 30 feet of painted hallway. She went still, not frozen, not panicked. Still. The way a person goes still when something they have been braced for, somewhere deep and unspoken, finally arrives. Like a wave you saw coming from far out and told yourself you were ready for, and then it hits and you discover that ready was never really the right word. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. The boy tugged at her coat. She looked down at him, said something Marco couldn't hear. The boy went back to his airplane. When she looked back up, the stillness was gone, replaced by something controlled and deliberate, something she had built in the years since he last saw her. Her expression didn't tell him anything now. And that itself told him everything, because the Lila he had known at 25 had worn everything she felt somewhere on her face. She had been, in his experience, constitutionally incapable of hiding what she was feeling. This woman had learned. She said something to the nurse beside her. Then she walked down the corridor toward him, unhurried but direct, the boy trailing behind with the airplane, and Marco made himself stand straight, made himself breathe, made himself be whatever version of himself still functioned under circumstances like these. She stopped 6 feet away. He said her name. Lila. She said Marco. Her voice had changed too. Deeper somehow. More settled in itself. The voice of someone who had stopped being uncertain about who she was. Your uncle, she said. He's here. I heard the name DeLuca on the floor. I wasn't sure it was you. Dominic. Cardiac. 7th floor. I know, I'm not in cardiac, obviously. She gestured slightly at the ward around them. I was walking. I came through the wrong doors. She looked at him in a way that wasn't quite believing that, but didn't argue it. Silence. The boy had come to stand beside her, no longer focused on the airplane, now focused on Marco with that particular child intensity that doesn't know yet to disguise itself. He was studying Marco's face the way the very young study everything, without performance, without pretense. Who's that? The boy asked. The question landed in the silence like a stone in still water. Lila looked down at her son. Something moved through her expression so fast Marco almost missed it. Something that was there and then sealed away in less than a breath. Someone Mommy knows, she said, from a long time ago. The boy considered this. Then he looked back at Marco with the airplane held against his chest. Your shoes are wet, he said. Marco looked down. The boy was right. He'd walked through the rain without thinking about it, and his shoes were still dark at the toes. Yeah, Marco said, they are. You should dry them. I should. The boy went back to his airplane. Lila's jaw was set now, and Marco could see the exact shape of what she was holding. He could see it because he knew how to read pressure in people. He had spent 20 years learning to see what people were holding before it became something they couldn't hold anymore. It was how he had survived. It was how he had built everything he had. He could see that she was holding something enormous. He's beautiful, Marco said quietly. Her eyes came back to his fast, and there it was. Not anger exactly, not yet, but the precursor to it, the particular heat that comes before. Don't, she said. One word. He heard everything in it. Lila, not here, she said. Not in this hallway. Not in front of... She stopped. Reset. I have patience. I have a department to run. I have a life here that does not have room for... She stopped again. I know, he said. You don't know anything. It wasn't said with volume. That was the thing about the way she said it. She didn't need volume. The weight was already built in. Marco said nothing. She looked at him for one more long moment, measuring something he couldn't read, and then she looked down at the boy. Miles, stay close to me, okay? Okay, the boy said, turning the airplane in his hands. Miles. Marco filed the name somewhere immediate and private. She pulled out her phone. Made a decision. I get off at 7, she said. Not today. I cannot do today. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. There's a coffee place on Columbus Whitmore's, you'll see it. She looked up from the phone. 1 hour. That's it. Okay, he said. She looked at him once more, the kind of look that isn't looking for anything because it's already found it and doesn't like what it found. And then she moved back down the corridor with her son, the boy holding his airplane by his side now, the engine sounds gone quiet. Marco stood at the edge of the pediatric ward and watched them go. He counted backward. He was 42 months in London before that. He left New York he ran the numbers, and then he ran them again because the first time they came out wrong. They came out the same the second time, 4 years and 11 months ago. The boy was 4. The rain outside the hospital windows ran in long, vertical lines against the glass. Marco walked back through the double doors to the cardiac unit, moving at normal speed, breathing at normal speed, maintaining everything about himself that he maintained in the ordinary conduct of impossible things. He sat beside his uncle's bed. Dominic was asleep, his chest rising and falling with the particular labor of a man who had asked too much of his own body for too many decades. The monitors beeped their steady arithmetic. The room smelled of recycled air and something faintly medicinal that Marco couldn't name. He sat there for a long time. He tried to do the arithmetic differently. He tried to find the version of the numbers that came out to something other than what they kept coming out to. Children can be small for their age. Children can have features that look like other people's features for reasons that have nothing to do with biology. A jaw angle. A way of holding the head. These were not proofs. But he had not survived in his world this long by flinching from what the evidence showed. He had not built what he built by choosing the comfortable interpretation when the honest interpretation was available. The boy had his eyes. He hadn't been close enough to see them clearly, not from 30 feet of hospital corridor, but what he had seen in that brief, direct look, the color, the shape, that specific quality of attention. He had seen those eyes every morning for 29 years in his own mirror. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and held them there. His phone buzzed, a message from Vincent in London, something about a contract dispute in the East End that needed resolution by end of week. Ordinary business. The machinery of his life continuing to run without him while he sat in a hospital room in Manhattan, calculating the impossible. He didn't answer it. His mother came back at 5 in the afternoon. She brought food from the restaurant downstairs, sandwiches and paper bags. And she talked about Dominic's prognosis in the precise vocabulary of someone who had spent the morning asking doctors very specific questions and writing down their answers. Marco listened and ate half a sandwich and gave her what responses were needed. She looked at him twice with that same look she had given him the day before, not asking anything directly, just registering. After she left at 6:30, he sat alone again. He thought about Lila at 25. He thought about the apartment they had shared for 8 months on the Lower East Side, the one with the radiator that made noise in the winter, and the kitchen window that looked out onto a fire escape where she sometimes sat with a coffee in the early morning when she couldn't sleep. He thought about the night before he left. Not the last night, but the night before, when everything had still felt like it had weight and shape and was pointed in some direction he hadn't fully chosen yet. He thought about the way he had boarded that flight. He did not think about it often. He did not allow himself to think about it often, because the thinking led places that had no productive end. He had made a decision. He had been 24 years old, and his father was in federal prison, and the empire his family had built was contracting under outside pressure, and he had been the one who could hold it together and extend it and grow it into something that would survive what was trying to kill it, and that had required him to be in London. And London had required a version of him that was undivided. He had told himself that many times. He had also never called her back. That last part he did not allow himself to sit with, usually. He was sitting with it now, in this hospital room, because the floor had shifted under him today, and he couldn't get his footing, and the normal mechanisms were not working the way they were supposed to work. She had called him 3 times in the week after he left. He had seen the calls. He had not answered them. He had told himself, and this was the particular cruelty of it, the part he never said out loud to anyone. He had told himself it was cleaner, that picking up would have made the extraction messier, that she would move forward faster if there was nothing to hold on to. He had believed that. He had believed it for 5 years, building things and running things and being the architecture of an empire. And he had believed it fine, carried it fine, right up until 3 hours ago when a boy with his jaw in his eyes looked up at him from a hospital corridor and asked about his shoes. At 9 o'clock that night, Marco left the hospital and walked back to the hotel in the rain. He did not use an umbrella. The water came down steadily, soaking through his coat, and he walked 11 blocks without registering the cold because somewhere underneath the cold was something worse, something that had been sealed in a particular compartment for 5 years and was now, visibly, undeniably, leaking. He got to the hotel. He went upstairs. He stood at the window of his room and looked at the city below, its lights diffused and scattered by the rain, every street lamp its own blurred halo. He took out his phone. He put it down. He picked it up again. He had not called Lila Hart in 5 years. He had not let himself search for her name or her work or anything that might have told him what she had done with her life after he disappeared from it. He had built that wall deliberately and maintained it with the same discipline he applied to everything else. It was the only way the thing worked. But the wall was already gone. It had come down in 30 feet of hallway in about 40 seconds, and the question now was not whether it was gone. It was gone. The question was what he did with the space where the wall had been. 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Whitmore's on Columbus. He set the phone face down on the bedside table and lay back on the hotel bed with his coat still on, staring at the ceiling, running the numbers again. 4 years and 11 months. A boy who was 4. His jaw. His eyes. That specific tilt of the head. He ran the numbers until they stopped changing. They didn't stop changing. Outside, the rain accelerated, drumming hard against the window glass, and Marco DeLuca lay in the dark of his hotel room in a city he had left and a life he had abandoned, and thought about a child who had looked at his wet shoes with complete sincerity and told him he should dry them. The thought wouldn't stop. It was the most useless, the most ordinary, the most devastating thing anyone had said to him in years, and it would not stop. He did not sleep. When the gray light of morning finally began to separate itself from the dark outside, Marco got up, showered, put on dry clothes, and sat by the window until 6:45. Then he got up, put on his coat, and walked 11 blocks through the early morning cold toward a coffee shop on Columbus Avenue. He was going to get there before her. He needed to already be sitting down. He needed at least that much. Because whatever she was about to tell him, he already knew what she was about to tell him. And the only thing he could control now was whether he was standing or sitting when she said it out loud. He pushed through the door of Whitmore's at 6:58. He ordered a coffee he wouldn't taste. He sat down at a table in the back where he could see the door. He waited. At 7:03, the door opened. Lila came in without her coat, just her scrubs and a cardigan over them, like she had come straight from the hospital, or like she had not gone home at all. She spotted him immediately. She walked to the table and put her hands on the back of the chair across from him, but didn't sit. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You already know, don't you?" It wasn't a question. Marco held his coffee cup with both hands and looked up at her. "Tell me anyway," he said. She sat down. Not because she was ready, because standing while she said it would have given him the wrong idea about what kind of power she still carried in this conversation. And Lila Hart had spent 4 years and 11 months making sure she was never again the person standing in a room waiting for Marco DeLuca to decide what happened next. She sat. She put both hands flat on the table. She looked at him. "His name is Miles," she said. "He's 4 years old. He turned 4 in March." She let that land exactly where it needed to land. "And yes, he's yours." Marco didn't move. Not his hands, not his jaw, not the muscles around his eyes. She had expected something. A flinch, a breath. Anything that said the human being was still in there behind all the architecture he'd built around himself. She got nothing. That scared her more than anything else would have. "Say something," she said. "How long have you known I was in New York?" She blinked. That was not the sentence she had prepared for. "What?" "The ward. Yesterday. You said you heard the name DeLuca on the floor." His voice was level. Not flat. There was something running underneath it. She could hear it the way you can hear current under ice. But controlled. Always controlled. "How long did you know before I walked through those doors?" "I heard it that morning. From the charge nurse." She pulled her hands back from the table and put them in her lap. "I thought about leaving the building." "But you didn't." "No." "Why not?" "Because I'm the head of that department," she said. "And I don't leave my patients because a man I used to know showed up in a different ward." He looked at her for a long moment. The coffee sat between them, untouched on his side. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't know." "I would have—" "Don't!" She said it the same way she had said it in the corridor. Flat. Load-bearing. "Don't finish that sentence, Marco, because you don't know what you would have done, and neither do I. And that's not actually the conversation we need to have." "Then what conversation do we need to have?" She looked at the table, then back at him. "I called you 3 times, she said. "After you left. 3 times in 7 days. You saw them. I know you saw them because you never once in 8 months missed a call from me, which means the missing was deliberate." She kept her voice even. This was not new material. She had been over this in her head enough times that it had worn smooth, the sharp edges gone. What was left was just the shape of it, clean and finished. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after the 3rd call. By then I had already decided that if you couldn't pick up the phone, you didn't get to be part of what came next." Marco's jaw moved. "Lila, I'm not done." She held up one hand, not aggressive, just precise. "I raised him alone. I finished my residency with a newborn. I was in the hospital for 36-hour shifts, and I had a woman named Carol from the 3rd floor watching Miles in my apartment, and I did not ask you for anything because you had made very clear that you were not available to be asked." She took a breath. "That is the record. That is what happened. I'm not interested in relitigating it or in your explanation for why you didn't pick up the phone, because the explanation doesn't change the 4 years. Yes. Tuy mainte. Silence. Outside, Columbus Avenue was building its morning rhythm. Delivery trucks, early joggers, the specific cacophony of a city waking up without apology. Inside Whitmore's, the espresso machine released a blast of steam, and the sound of it made them both pull back slightly, a shared flinch that neither of them commented on. Marco looked down at his coffee. "I'm not going to tell you I had reasons," he said. "Good. I'm going to tell you I made choices, and they were wrong." Lila studied his face. The lines of it were harder than she remembered. There was something at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, a kind of weight pressed repeatedly into the same spot. She recognized it because she saw it in the mirror. "I know they were wrong," she said. "I've known that for 5 years." She leaned forward slightly. "What I need to know right now, today, is what you're planning to do. Because you being in New York and knowing what you know now, that changes things whether I want it to or not. So I need to know what comes next, from you, specifically." Marco lifted his eyes to hers. "I want to see him." The words were quiet, stripped of everything else. She had known he would say it. She had spent the night sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't drink, turning over every version of this conversation, and in every version he said those words, and in every version she felt the same thing she felt now. Not anger, not grief, but something closer to a terrible, exhausted recognition, like the arrival of weather you've been watching build on the horizon for a long time. "He doesn't know who you are," she said. "He will. Not if I—" "Lila." He said her name the way he used to when he wanted her to stop and actually hear him, not the argument she was having with the version of him in her head, but the actual him, sitting across the table. She hated that it still worked. "I'm not here to take anything. I'm not—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. "I know I don't have standing. I know I gave that up. I'm not coming in here and making demands." "Then what are you doing?" "I'm asking." She looked at him. He looked back. In 8 months of living with this man, she had learned that Marco De Luca did not ask for things. He positioned them. He arranged circumstances. He built the architecture of situations so that what he wanted became the most logical outcome. Asking, plain, unprotected asking, was not something he did. She had seen it maybe twice. This was the 3rd time. She picked up her coffee, drank, put it back down. "Where are you staying?" she said. "West Side, hotel on 72nd. How long are you in New York?" "Dominic's surgery is day after tomorrow. Recovery is at least 2 weeks before he can travel. I'm here until he's stable." 2 weeks. She processed that. "I'm not introducing you to him as his father," she said. "Not yet. Not until I know what this looks like. If you're here for 2 weeks and then you go back to London and that's the end of it, I am not putting Miles through that. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "This is not negotiable." "I understand." Marco. She waited until he was fully with her. "I need you to understand that he is the thing I will not compromise on. Not for you. Not for what we were. Not for anything. He comes first. He comes first every single time." Something moved through Marco's expression that she couldn't categorize. It wasn't guilt exactly. She knew what his guilt looked like, and it was usually indistinguishable from anger at himself, which came out as stillness, a particular clamped-down stillness. This was something else. Something that looked almost like— She cut the thought off. "Okay," he said. She gathered her things, pushed her chair back. "I have rounds at 8. She stood. "I'll think about what I said and I'll call you. I have your number. I never deleted it." She saw that land. She hadn't meant it as a knife. It was just true. She hadn't deleted it because deleting it would have required sitting with the phone in her hand and making a deliberate choice about what it meant. And there had never been a night in 4 years when she'd had enough emotional bandwidth left over from keeping herself and Miles alive to spend it on that particular decision. She left the money for her coffee on the table and walked out. The cold air hit her face, and she kept walking because stopping would have meant something she didn't have room for right now. She had a department, she had rounds. She had 3 pediatric patients whose treatment protocols she had been calibrating for the past week, whose parents looked at her the way people look at the only person standing between them and the worst thing they can imagine. She could not afford to be undone by a coffee shop conversation. She walked 2 blocks before she stopped and stood at the corner of Columbus and 74th, and put her hands in the pockets of her cardigan and breathed. Just breathed. Cold air in, cold air out. The traffic moved. A man walked a dog. A woman in a red coat pushed a stroller with one hand and talked on her phone with the other. The ordinary world continuing to be ordinary. She was still standing there when her phone buzzed. Carol! Miles was awake and refusing his breakfast because it wasn't the specific kind of cereal he wanted, and could Lila please talk to him? She almost laughed. Almost. She called. Miles answered with immediate urgency about the cereal situation, his voice carrying the full moral weight that 4-year-olds invest in these matters. And she stood on the corner of Columbus and 74th and negotiated with her son about breakfast food, and for 3 minutes she was not a woman sitting across from her past in a coffee shop. She was just his mother. That was enough. For now, that was enough. She said goodbye, told him to eat the toast at least, and ended the call. Then she walked back to the hospital and did her job. Marco stayed at the table after she left. The coffee had gone cold. He drank it anyway because leaving it would have felt like a statement, and he was done making statements with his exits. He sat with the cold coffee and the ambient noise of the shop and ran back through the conversation looking for the places where he had said wrong things, which was a habit he had that he'd never been able to fully extinguish, this post-analysis instinct. The way he reviewed every significant meeting and cataloged what had worked and what had failed and what he would do differently. The problem was that in this particular case, none of that framework applied. There was no tactic here, no adjustment he could make to the positioning that would improve the outcome. He had walked into a situation 5 years of his own making, and the only available move was the one he had already made, plain, undressed asking. He hated how exposed it felt. He paid for both coffees, walked out. He spent the morning with Dominic, who was in a better mood and complained about the television reception in his room, and asked Marco twice about specific business matters that Marco deflected both times with vague reassurances. Dominic wasn't fooled, but he let it go. His mother arrived at 11, and the three of them occupied the same space with the practiced ease of people who had spent decades in each other's company, filling silences without having to work at it. Marco said nothing about Lila, nothing about what he'd learned. He wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Saying it out loud to someone other than Lila made it a different kind of real, the kind that started having consequences he hadn't finished mapping. He left the hospital at 2. He walked. New York walking was different from London walking. London pedestrians had a particular relationship with their own trajectory. Purposeful, slightly defensive. New York pedestrians operated on a different physics, aggressive and unpredictable, the city treating sidewalk space as a contact sport. He'd forgotten that. Or maybe he'd forgotten that he used to move through it like that too, shoulders forward, eyes forward, daring the city to get in his way. He walked 15 blocks before he knew where he was going. He did not mean to end up on the block where the apartment had been. He genuinely did not mean to. The feet had made a decision the brain hadn't signed off on, and by the time he registered it, he was standing across the street from a building he had last been inside 5 years ago, looking up at windows he used to know by which floor they were on and which direction the light came through in the morning. The building looked the same. Buildings always looked the same. He stood there for maybe 2 minutes. Then he took out his phone and called Vincent in London. "The situation on the East End," he said when Vincent picked up. "Tell Mallory we accept the boundary revision as proposed. The numbers work. Don't let them see us thinking about it. Just accept and close it." "That's a shift from yesterday," Vincent said. "I know what it is." A pause. "You all right over there? Handle the East End thing. I'll call you tomorrow." He hung up. He stood on the sidewalk outside the old building for another 30 seconds. Then he turned around and walked back toward the hotel, and this time he didn't let his feet make any independent decisions. She called at 6. He was in the hotel room, jacket off, sitting at the small desk by the window. He picked up on the second ring. "Hi," she said. "Hi." A short silence. He could hear something in the background. A child's voice, distant, the sound of a cartoon. "I talked to Carol," Lila said. "She can take Miles tomorrow afternoon, 4 o'clock. I finish rounds at 3:30. She stopped, started again. "There's a park, Riverside. We take him there sometimes after dinner when the weather's okay. I thought I could bring him. You could be there. Not introduced, not formally, just present," he said. "Yes." Her voice was careful, the kind of careful that has costs. "Just present, to start." "Okay." "Marco." Her voice changed register, dropped slightly. If you do anything, if you say anything to him, introduce yourself in any way without my being there and my permission, I won't. I mean it. I know you mean it. He kept his voice steady. I'll be there. I won't do anything you haven't said yes to first. Another silence. In the background, the cartoon sound shifted. The boy must have moved rooms. Then it went quiet. He asked about you, Lila said. Marco went very still. At dinner, he asked why the man at the hospital looked like him. Her voice was controlled, but he could hear something working underneath it, some kind of effort. I told him sometimes people just look alike. He thought about it for a while, and then he said okay, and ate his noodles. Marco pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and said nothing. He's very literal, Lila said. He accepts information, and then he just processes it and moves forward. He's always been like that, since he was 2. He deals with things. She stopped. He heard what she was saying. He heard what she was not saying. The boy had dealt with not having a father, had processed the absence and moved forward with the same literal efficiency she was describing, because that was what you did when the absence was the whole of what you had to work with. Lila, he started. 4 o'clock, she said. Riverside Park. The entrance at 83rd. She paused. Don't be late. She ended the call. He put the phone down. He sat at the window for a long time while the city moved below him, and the light changed, and the evening came in at an angle through the glass. He thought about what she'd said. He thought about a 4-year-old at the dinner table, processing information, eating noodles, moving forward. He was not a man who cried. He had not cried since he was 9 years old, standing at a courthouse entrance watching his father be taken inside in handcuffs. And even then, he had done it quickly, privately, and then stopped. Because there was no one to receive it, and things that had no receiver felt like waste. He did not cry now, but something in his chest was doing something specific and pressurized that he had no word for and no real category to put it in, and it sat there all night. Through dinner, he ate alone at a place down the block, through the news on the hotel television that he watched without taking any of it in, through the long gray hours until morning. The next day at the hospital passed slowly. Dominic's pre-surgical tests, his mother managing logistics the way she always managed them, thorough, efficient, slightly imperious with the nursing staff in a way that stopped just short of being rude. Marco sat beside his uncle's bed, and they talked about things that were and were not important, and Dominic told the story of the first time he'd seen New York from the Staten Island ferry, a story Marco had heard 6 times, and Marco listened like it was the first. At 3:15, he told his mother he had an appointment and would be back by 7. She looked at him. Okay, she said, not pressing, but the look. He walked to Riverside Park. He got there at 3:50, walked the path along the river slowly, getting a sense of the space where the sightlines were, where a person coming in at the 83rd Street entrance would first see another person already there. He was aware that this was an operational instinct and that it had no business being applied here. He applied it anyway. It was what he had. At 4:02, he saw them. Lila came through the entrance with the boy on her left side, Miles walking with that same all-forward energy, a small backpack on his back with something dinosaur-related on it. They were talking. He couldn't hear it. They were still too far. But the body language was the easy physical conversation of a mother and a child who had spent years learning each other's rhythms. They got closer. Miles saw him first. His stride didn't break. He just looked with that same direct, undefended attention he'd had in the hospital corridor, and then he said something to Lila, and she nodded, and they kept walking until they were maybe 10 feet away. Hi, Miles said. Hey, Marco said. You dried your shoes. I did. Miles seemed satisfied with this. Lila stood slightly behind the boy, her arms crossed loosely at her waist, watching. Not Marco. Watching Miles. They walked. For 40 minutes, they just walked. The boy ran ahead and came back. He found a stick that he decided was important. He explained a complicated theory about why some pigeons were smarter than others that had internal logic. Marco couldn't fully follow but listened to with complete attention. Lila walked on the other side of Miles, and she and Marco did not speak directly to each other except once, when she asked if he wanted to sit on one of the benches by the water, and he said yes. They sat. Miles was at the railing watching a boat. "He likes the river," Lila said quietly. "Yeah. He always has. Since he was a baby, the water calmed him down." Marco watched the boy at the railing, the way he gripped the metal with both hands and leaned forward slightly to see better, the absolute seriousness of his attention. "He's not afraid of much," Marco said. "No." Lila's voice had something in it that was almost fond before she caught it. "He's not." Miles turned around from the railing. He walked back to the bench, climbed up beside Lila, and then looked across her at Marco. "What's your name?" he said. Lila's breath changed. Marco felt the weight of the moment compress. He knew what the right answer was. He knew what he had agreed to, what the boundary was, what the consequence was of crossing it. "Marco?" he said. Miles repeated it quietly, testing the shape of it. "Marco." "Yeah." "Do you live here?" "Not anymore. I'm visiting." "Where do you live?" "London?" Miles thought about this. "Is London far?" "Pretty far, across the ocean." The boy looked out at the river, as if measuring the concept of oceans against what he could currently see. "I've never seen the ocean," he said. "It's big," Marco said. Miles looked back at him. "Are you Mommy's friend?" The question sat in the air between all three of them. Lila was very still beside the boy. Marco met her eyes for a fraction of a second. He saw the held breath in her. He saw the particular tension of a person waiting to see if someone will do what they said they would do. "We knew each other a long time ago," Marco said carefully. "Before you were born." Miles accepted this. He looked back at the river. Then he slid off the bench, picked up his stick from the ground, and went back to the railing. Lila exhaled. They sat in silence for a moment. "Thank you," she said. It was barely above a whisper. "I meant what I said." She looked at her son at the railing, and Marco looked at her looking at him, and something passed between them that neither of them had words for, and neither of them reached for words to describe. They left the park at 5:15. Lila took Miles's hand at the gate, and the boy turned back once and waved at Marco. A small, specific wave, one hand, like he'd already decided this person was worth acknowledging. Marco raised his hand, watched them go. He stood on the sidewalk outside the park until they turned the corner and were gone. Then he took out his phone, stared at it, put it away. He was in New York for 2 more weeks. Dominic's surgery was tomorrow. After that, recovery. 2 weeks of this city, this proximity, this particular gravitational situation pulling him towards something he hadn't planned for and couldn't control and could not, he understood this clearly, could not simply leave again. He had left once. He understood now, standing on the street outside Riverside Park in the cooling late afternoon, what the cost of that leaving had actually been. Not in abstraction, not in the language of regret he'd let himself use on the bad nights in London, but in the concrete, specific form of a 4-year-old boy who had never seen the ocean and waved goodbye to a stranger like he'd already made his mind up about him. The cost was that, right there. And it kept walking. He started back toward the hotel. His phone buzzed. Not Vincent, not his mother. A New York number he didn't have saved. He stopped walking and picked up. "Mr. DeLuca." The voice was male, smooth, the particular smoothness of someone who had practiced sounding relaxed. "My name is Raymond Cho. I work for a gentleman who has been watching your London operation with considerable interest. He'd like to meet." Marco stood on the sidewalk, the city moving around him. "Who's the gentleman?" he said. "His name is Park. Daniel Park." A pause, perfectly timed, the kind of pause people use when they want you to recognize a name and want to see if you do. "He has some thoughts about your New York infrastructure. He believes there's a mutual benefit conversation to be had." Marco knew the name. Daniel Park was not a legitimate businessman. He was not someone who operated on the edges. He was the center of a network that had been quietly moving into territory the DeLuca family had held for 20 years, doing it through intermediaries and legal structures and the particular kind of patience that made him considerably more dangerous than someone who came at you directly. His being in New York was not a coincidence. His knowing Marco was here was not a coincidence. "Tell him I don't take meetings arranged this way." Marco said. He anticipated you'd say that, Cho said. He also asked me to mention, and I'm quoting him directly here, that the pediatric wing at Meridian General is a beautiful facility, very impressive department. He has a lot of respect for the doctors there. The air temperature didn't change. The street didn't change. Marco's voice didn't change. But something happened in the space behind his eyes that was precise and cold, and without a trace of the thing that had been sitting in his chest all day, because that thing, that human, exposed particular thing, had just been handed a location and a potential use, and the response to that was not grief. The response to that was much older and much darker, and Marco DeLuca was very good at it. "Tell Mr. Park I'll be in touch," he said. He ended the call. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the phone in his hand. 2 weeks ago, he had been in London running an empire. Now he was standing on the street outside a park where he had just watched his son wave goodbye to him, holding a phone that had just told him that someone knew about the pediatric wing at Meridian General Hospital. Someone knew about Lila. Someone knew about Miles. And Marco DeLuca, who had built his empire on control and silence and decisions that left no room for regret, understood with absolute clarity that the particular compartment he had been trying to keep separate, the human thing, the father thing, the Lila thing, had just become the most dangerous thing he owned. There was no version of the next 2 weeks that looked like what this morning had looked like. That version was gone. Dozed. He called Vincent before he reached the next block. "Daniel Park," he said the moment the call connected. "Tell me everything current." Vincent was quiet for 2 seconds, the kind of quiet that means the person on the other end is recalibrating, shifting from whatever they were doing into the gear that Marco needed them in. Vincent had worked for Marco for 6 years. He knew the difference between a routine call and this kind of call. "Park's been quiet for about 8 months, Vincent said. "Last movement we tracked was a logistics acquisition in Queens, storage facilities. We flagged it, but it didn't cross any lines directly. Storage in Queens. 3 facilities. All legitimate on paper. We assumed it was infrastructure for the import side. He just had someone call my personal cell," Marco said. "A man named Raymond Cho. Park knows I'm in New York. He knows which hospital I'm spending time in. He specifically mentioned the pediatric wing." Another silence. Longer this time. "That's not a coincidence," Vincent said. "No." "How long has he known you're there?" "I need you to find that out." Marco kept his voice level, kept his pace steady on the sidewalk, kept the outside of him doing what it was supposed to do. "I need to know who's been talking. I need to know if this is surveillance or something closer. I'll start pulling threads tonight." "Vincent?" Marco stopped walking. The pediatric wing comment was specific. He wasn't referencing the cardiac unit. He knew which wing. He let that sit for a moment. "Find out how." He ended the call. He stood on the corner of 81st and Broadway and thought about the specific geometry of what had just happened. Park was not a man who made casual references. Every word out of that conversation had been constructed. The smooth voice of the intermediary, the well-timed pause before the name, and then the Meridian General comment, dropped at the end like something almost forgotten, like an afterthought. It wasn't an afterthought. It was a coordinate. It was Park telling him, "I know where the soft thing is." Marco started walking again. He did not go back to the hotel. He walked 6 blocks south and turned east and kept moving until he found a bar that was mostly empty at this hour. A neighborhood place, wood paneling, a television in the corner showing sports scores nobody was watching. He sat at the far end of the bar with his back to the wall and ordered a whiskey he was going to drink slowly, and he thought. The thinking was the most important thing right now. Not reaction, not movement. Thinking. Park wanted a meeting. That meant Park wanted something he didn't currently have and believed Marco could provide it or be leveraged into providing it. The New York infrastructure reference meant territory. The DeLuca family still held significant operational ground in this city, even with Marco based in London, and that ground had value that a network expanding from the outside would want access to. The Meridian General reference meant something else. It meant Park had done the math. It meant somewhere, somehow, someone had connected Marco DeLuca to a pediatric department at a hospital on the Upper West Side, and Park had decided that connection was worth naming out loud. Marco drank. The whiskey was mediocre. He didn't register it. The question that mattered was not what Park wanted. The question that mattered was how Park knew. Because Marco had been in New York for less than 72 hours. He had gone from JFK to the hotel, to the hospital, to the coffee shop, to Riverside Park. He had made 2 phone calls to London and 1 to a number he didn't have saved. He had not contacted anyone in the New York operation. He had not announced his presence to anyone in this city except his mother and his uncle, both of whom he was not even going to complete that thought because it was insulting to complete it, which meant someone had been watching from outside, which meant Park had resources in place before Marco arrived, watching the hospital, watching who came and went from the cardiac unit, and had seen Marco there and had then done something more, had gone further, had watched which other parts of the hospital Marco moved through, had seen him in the pediatric corridor, had seen Lila, had seen Miles, and had decided, with the particular cold intelligence of a man who dealt in leverage, that this was the most useful thing he had found. Marco put the glass down. He paid. He left. Outside, he called his mother. "Is anyone with you right now?" he said. She heard his voice, and the questions she might otherwise have asked didn't come. "No, I'm at home." "Stay there tonight. Don't go back to the hospital until I call you in the morning." A pause. "Marco, what's happening?" "Nothing that concerns Dominic directly, but I need you home tonight." Another pause. He could hear her breathing, could hear the particular quality of her silence that meant she was running calculations. His mother was not a woman who required things to be explained twice. "Okay," she said, "lock the door." "Marco, it's a precaution. It probably means nothing." She heard the word probably and what it carried. "I'll call you in the morning," he said. He went back to the hotel. He called the front desk and changed his room, moved from the 6th floor to the 3rd, different side of the building. The desk clerk was mildly confused. Marco gave him $300 in cash, and the confusion resolved itself. In the new room, he sat at the desk and opened his laptop and began working through the layers of his New York operation the way a surgeon works through tissue, careful, methodical, looking for the thing that didn't belong. He spent 2 hours on it. He found nothing obvious, which meant either the breach was subtle enough that he wasn't going to find it in 2 hours on a laptop in a hotel room, or the breach was outside the operation entirely. Someone watching from the outside rather than someone embedded on the inside. At 11:15, his phone buzzed. Vincent. "Raymond Cho," Vincent said without preamble. "He's been with Park for 4 years. Before that, he worked for a man named Seo in Chicago who had dealings with the DeLuca operation about 7 years back. He knows the family." "He knows the family," Marco repeated. "Specifically, and this is the part that's interesting, he was involved in a negotiation in 2019 with your cousin Alfie, a deal that went sideways. Alfie came out of it fine. Cho's people didn't." Marco was quiet. "Cho has a reason to know your face," Vincent continued. "He has a reason to have been watching for you." "So this started before I landed." "It started before you booked the flight," Vincent said. Someone flagged that Dominic DeLuca was admitted to Meridian General. Someone who knew what that would mean. That it would bring you back to New York. Marco pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. "Someone in the hospital," he said, "or someone with access to hospital admission records. That's a short list." "I'm working it," Vincent said. "But Marco, the pediatric wing thing, I've been thinking about it." He paused. "Did something happen in the pediatric wing?" Marco said nothing. Vincent, to his credit, did not push. He waited. "Keep working the list," Marco said. "Call me when you have a name." He ended the call. He sat in the dark of the hotel room, the laptop screen the only light, and he thought about the next move. The correct next move was to call Park back through Cho and take the meeting. Take the meeting, understand the full scope of what Park wanted, and then make a decision about how to handle it. That was the rational move, the experienced move, the move that a man who had run an empire for 5 years without losing it would make. The problem was Lila. The problem was Miles. The problem was that the thing Park was holding wasn't a piece of territory or a contract or a business arrangement. The thing Park was holding was the pediatric wing at Meridian General, and what that meant was that before Marco did anything else, before he took any meeting or made any move, he needed Lila to understand that her world had just changed whether she wanted it to or not. He picked up the phone. He put it back down. It was almost midnight. She had a department to run. She had rounds at 8. He had no way of knowing if she was asleep or awake. No way of knowing if Miles was in the next room. No way of knowing anything about the texture of her life, because he had been absent from it for 5 years, and the price of that absence was that he now had to walk into it sideways, through crisis, which was the worst possible way. He waited until 6:15 in the morning. Then he called. She answered on the third ring, and from the sound of her voice she had been awake. "What's wrong?" Not a question. She heard it in him. "I need to see you this morning," he said, "before you go in. It's important." A short silence. "Miles is still sleeping. I have until 7. I'll come to you. Give me the address." Another silence, longer, and he understood what it cost her to say the next thing, the particular vulnerability of letting him into the space where she lived with her son. She gave him the address. He was there in 20 minutes. She lived in a building on West 88th, a pre-war with a doorman who called up before letting Marco through. 3rd floor. She was waiting at the door when he came off the elevator, still in the clothes she'd apparently slept in, or not slept in, a worn gray shirt and pajama pants, her hair down, and for a single unguarded second when he came down the hallway, she looked exactly the way she had looked at 25, before whatever had replaced that version of her took back over. She stepped back to let him in. The apartment was small, warm, covered in the organized chaos of a working single parent. Books stacked in precise towers. A child's drawing on the refrigerator. A blue figure that might have been a person or might have been a rocket ship. It was difficult to tell. A coffee maker already running. She poured 2 cups without asking and handed him one and stood on the other side of the kitchen counter. "Talk," she said. He talked. He told her about the call, about Raymond Cho, about Daniel Park. He told it cleanly, without editorializing, the way he reported operational information to his own people, facts in sequence, implications flagged, conclusions labeled as conclusions rather than certainties. He watched her face as he talked. She was a doctor. She had trained herself out of the reflex reactions, the visible fear, the body language that broadcast what the inside was doing. She listened to him the way she probably listened to difficult diagnoses, fully present, not moving, processing. When he finished, she put her coffee cup down. "He mentioned the pediatric wing specifically," she said. "Yes." "He was telling you he knows about me." "Yes." "About Miles." "I don't know how much he knows," Marco said, but the reference was deliberate. He wanted me to understand that he had identified something I'd want to protect. She was quiet for a moment. "How does he know about Miles?" Her voice was careful, but underneath the careful was something that was not careful at all, something pressurized and beginning to move. "I don't know yet. I'm working on that." "You've been in New York for 3 days, Marco." "I know." 3 days. She pushed back from the counter. She moved to the window, her arms folding across her chest. "You've been here 3 days, and someone who wants to use you has already identified my son. I know what this looks like." She turned from the window. "Do you?" "Because what it looks like is that you walked back into my life, and inside 72 hours, my child is in the peripheral vision of someone who plays the kind of games you play." Her voice was not raised. It was the opposite of raised. It was compressed, dense, the kind of voice that has weight because all the volume has been removed from it. And what's left is just force. "This is what I told you. This is exactly what I told you. That your world doesn't coexist with safe ones. I didn't bring this here intentionally. I know that. Then, knowing it was unintentional doesn't make Miles less visible to this man." She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth for a moment, thinking. "What does he want?" "Park." "A meeting." He framed it as a business conversation, territory access probably. "He's been moving into spaces my family holds in New York." "And if you don't meet with him?" Marco was quiet. She read the quiet. "He escalates. He finds another way to apply pressure." She looked at him. "Using whatever he knows." "That's the likely progression, yes." She turned back to the window. Outside, the street was building its morning. Garbage truck grinding somewhere nearby, a siren passing, the first school-run parents on the sidewalk. "Miles can't go to the hospital today," she said. No, I'd feel better if he wasn't at Meridian at all right now. He goes there sometimes after school. Carol brings him and he sits in the family room while I finish late rounds. She was talking through the logistics, mapping the change, already moving into the mode that kept her functional under impossible conditions. I'll call Carol. He can go to her apartment today. Good. I need to call the hospital's security office as well. Don't mention Park by name. Don't mention me. She looked at him sharply. Not because I'm protecting myself, he said. Because if Park has a contact inside the hospital, and he might, you don't want him knowing you've been warned. She absorbed this, nodded. From somewhere in the apartment, a sound, small feet on a wood floor. They both heard it. Lila moved immediately, crossing from the kitchen toward the hallway, and Marco stayed where he was, and he heard her voice shift into the morning mother register, soft and specific. Hey, baby, come here, come to the kitchen. And then Miles appeared in the kitchen doorway in dinosaur pajamas, sleep-creased and squinting, holding something against his chest that Marco couldn't identify. The boy saw Marco. His face did several things in quick succession. Surprise, then the processing of surprise, then the settling into recognition. Marco, the boy said. Hey, Miles. Miles looked at his mother. Why is Marco here? He came to talk to me early, Lila said. She was crouching to his level, hands on his shoulders, already moving him gently toward the table. Before work. You want your cereal? The right kind? Yes, the right kind. Miles climbed into the chair. He put the thing he'd been holding on the table. It was a small toy, a dinosaur, a triceratops with one horn slightly bent. He arranged it with precision on the table in front of him, then looked at Marco again. Did you sleep here? He asked. No, Marco said. I have a hotel. What's a hotel? It's like a building where people sleep when they're visiting somewhere. Miles thought about this. Like a sleepover? Kind of, yeah. The boy seemed satisfied. He turned his attention to the cereal Lila was pouring, and the morning domestic machinery continued around Marco as he stood in the kitchen of the woman he had left 5 years ago and watched his son eat breakfast and felt the full specific weight of what he had walked into this city and set in motion simply by being visible. He left at 6:50. Lila walked him to the elevator. They stood in the hallway. Take the meeting, she said quietly. He looked at her. You said it yourself. He escalates if you don't. Her jaw was set. Take the meeting, find out what he actually wants, and then... She stopped, recalibrated. And then figure out how to make sure he understands that whatever leverage he thinks he has doesn't work. I will. Marco. She held his gaze and didn't let go of it. If anything happens to Miles because of this, nothing will happen to Miles. You can't promise that. I'm promising it anyway. She looked at him for a long moment. The elevator arrived. He got in. She was still looking at him when the doors closed. He called Cho from the lobby. The phone rang twice. Mr. DeLuca? Smooth, ready. Tell Park I'll meet him, Marco said. Today. My terms on the location. He'll be pleased to hear, I picked the place. I picked the time. He comes with one person. One. If I see more than two of them, I walk and we don't have this conversation again. A brief pause. I'll convey that. Noon, Marco said. I'll send the address 1 hour before. He ended the call. He spent the morning on it, picking the location, arranging the parameters, running the landscape the way he always ran it before a significant meeting. A restaurant in Midtown he had used before for this kind of thing, not owned by anyone connected, not carrying any particular significance. The kind of busy, anonymous lunch spot where two men sitting at a table attracted nothing. He called ahead, got the corner table. At 11, he texted Cho the address. At 11:50, he was at the restaurant. At 12:05, Daniel Park walked in. He was younger than Marco had expected. Early 40s, Korean-American, in a dark suit that was expensive without advertising it. One person with him, a woman, also suited, who took a position near the door without being asked. Park came to the table alone, sat down, and looked at Marco with the kind of direct assessment that skipped the social layer entirely. Marco looked back. Mr. DeLuca, Park said. Thank you for making time. My understanding is you've been making quite a bit of time for me, Marco said. Before I got here. Park didn't flinch. He picked up the water glass, drank, put it down. I like to know who I'm talking to before I talk to them. You mentioned Meridian General. I did. That wasn't a business reference. No, Park said simply. It wasn't. Marco kept his hands on the table, still, visible. Then let's be clear about what that was. Park looked at him steadily. It was me communicating that I'm fully informed about all relevant context. He paused. I have no interest in the pediatric wing, Mr. DeLuca, or anything in it. I want you to understand that. What I understand, Marco said, is that you put it on the table. I put it on the table to demonstrate that I've done my homework, not as a threat. Park's voice was measured. I'm not in the business of threatening children. Then why is it still sitting on the table? Park looked at him for a moment. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair, a deliberate move, creating distance, reducing the compressed energy of the conversation. Because I needed you to take this meeting seriously, and you're here. So it worked. The honesty of it was almost disarming. Almost. Talk, Marco said. Park talked. The proposal took 12 minutes to lay out. Territory access, specifically 3 distribution corridors in Upper Manhattan and the Bronx that the DeLuca operation controlled through legacy arrangements going back 15 years. Park wanted passage rights, not ownership, passage and a percentage. In exchange, Park's network would provide a buffer. A wall, essentially, between the DeLuca operation and a federal investigation that Park said, and here his voice remained entirely level, had been building for approximately 8 months and was considerably further along than Marco's people in New York currently knew. Marco listened to all of it without moving. When Park finished, Marco said, "What federal investigation?" "Task Force," Park said. "Organized Crime Division. They've been working the DeLuca, New York infrastructure since last spring. They have a cooperating witness." He picked up his water glass again. Someone inside. The temperature in Marco's chest dropped several degrees. "Who's the witness?" Marco said. Park set the glass down. "That's the second part of the conversation," he said, "and it's the part I think you'll find considerably more difficult." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, removed a folded piece of paper, placed it on the table between them. Marco looked at it. He picked it up, unfolded it. It was a photograph. Printed, not a screen capture. Someone had gone to the trouble of printing it, which meant someone had gone to the trouble of making it physical, making it something that could be handed across a table and left behind. The photograph showed a man Marco knew, had known, had trusted with the specific kind of trust that you build over years, over shared risk, over the particular intimacy of people who have stood in the same rooms during the same dangerous moments and come out the other side. Vincent. The photograph showed Vincent in what appeared to be a parking garage, in conversation with 2 people whose body language, the way they stood, the angle of their badges clipped to their belts, was unmistakably federal. The photograph had a date stamp in the lower right corner. 6 months ago. Marco set the photograph down on the table. He did not move. He did not speak. He sat with the photograph between them and the restaurant noise around them and the specific sensation of 5 years of architecture, the careful, disciplined, controlled architecture of everything he had built, beginning to crack along a fault line he had never once suspected was there. Vincent. The man he had called from outside the old apartment. The man he had called last night from the hotel. The man he had told, in specific, detailed terms, about Meridian General, about the pediatric wing, about everything Marco had walked into when he came through those hospital doors. He had told Vincent, and Vincent had told someone else. Park was watching him with the expression of someone who has delivered a weight and is now waiting to see how the person receiving it handles the impact. Marco looked up from the photograph. "How long have you had this?" he said. 3 months? "Why didn't you move on it sooner?" "Because you weren't in New York," Park said, "and this conversation needed to happen in person." Marco looked back at the photograph, at Vincent's face and profile, at the timestamp. 6 months ago, Vincent had been meeting with federal agents. 6 months ago. And in the 5 months since, Marco had made approximately, he didn't want to count, he would have to count, how many calls, how many conversations, how many operational details had moved through the phone line between London and New York in 5 months, with a man who had been inside the investigation since before any of those calls were made. And last night he had called Vincent and told him about the pediatric wing, about the specific reference, and he had asked Vincent to pull threads to find out who was watching and how. He had handed Vincent the exact information that would make the thread easier to pull. Marco folded the photograph, put it in his own jacket pocket. Park didn't object. "The corridor access," Marco said. His voice was level. It was level because he was making it level, applying the same deliberate control to his voice that he was applying to every other external surface, while the internal architecture continued its quiet, catastrophic process of revision. "If I agree to passage rights, the task force loses its primary informant," Park said. "My people handle that. You don't need to know how. And the investigation collapses without him. What they have is built around his testimony. Without him, they have records and surveillance and no one to explain what any of it means." Park looked at him steadily. "You'd need to rebuild your operation from the outside in. New contacts, new channels. It costs you 18 months, maybe 2 years of momentum. But you survive it." Marco looked at the table. 2 years of rebuilding. Or the alternative, do nothing, let the task force finish building its case, and watch everything he had constructed for the past decade come apart in a federal courtroom. He already knew which option he was taking. He had known it before Park finished the sentence. What he was thinking about was not the decision. He was thinking about Vincent picking up the phone last night, smooth and competent, telling Marco about Raymond Cho's history with Alfie. Information that was designed to sound useful, designed to redirect Marco toward Cho and away from the actual breach, feeding Marco just enough to seem trustworthy. 6 years. He had trusted Vincent for 6 years. He looked up at Park. "I need 48 hours, he said. "You have 24, Park said. "After that, I have to assume you're not interested, and I find another solution." Marco nodded. He stood. Park stood. They did not shake hands. Marco walked out of the restaurant and into the midtown afternoon, the photograph in his jacket pocket, the cold thing behind his eyes fully operational now, the human thing, the Miles thing, the Lila thing, sealed somewhere behind it, not gone, present but compressed into a shape that could not be permitted to affect what happened next. He took out his phone. He needed to make a call. Not to Vincent, never to Vincent again. That line was dead, whatever came next. He needed to make a call to the one person in his New York operation who was not Vincent, who Vincent had not built, who had existed in the structure independently long enough that Marco could still, possibly, conditionally, trust. He found the number. He dialed. It rang 4 times. And then, from somewhere behind him on the midtown sidewalk, close enough that he felt it before he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a phone buzzing in someone else's pocket. He turned. The woman from the restaurant, Park's person, the suited woman who had taken a position near the door, was standing 8 feet behind him on the sidewalk, her phone in her hand, and she was not looking at her phone. She was looking at him. Marco did not move. 8 feet. The woman standing 8 feet behind him on a midtown sidewalk, her phone buzzing in her hand, looking at him like she had been looking at him for considerably longer than the last 3 seconds. Like looking at him was the job. Like the restaurant, the door position, the suited composure. All of it had been positioned exactly the way it was positioned so that she could be standing here, now, 8 feet behind him. At the exact moment he tried to make a call she was supposed to intercept. He lowered his phone. She didn't move. Around them, Midtown continued its indifferent afternoon. Foot traffic, cab horns, a construction compressor somewhere above them on a scaffold that drove a rhythmic metallic pulse into the air. Nobody around them understood that the space between 2 people on a sidewalk had just become something other than a sidewalk. Marco said, "How long?" She said, "Long enough." Her voice was steady. No accent he could place. The suit was good, charcoal, the kind of quality that suggested this was not her first conversation of this type. "You work for Park," he said. "I work adjacent to Park," she said. "It's a distinction that matters." "Who do you work for?" She tilted her head slightly. "The same task force your man Vincent has been talking to for 6 months." She paused, let it land. My name is Agent Reyes, and I think you should put the phone away, Mr. DeLuca, because whoever you're about to call, I already know who it is." Marco's jaw tightened. She held up one hand, not aggressive, not reaching for anything, just open, a gesture that said, "I'm not here to take you down on a midtown sidewalk. I'm here to talk." "There's a coffee shop," she said. "Half a block. Walk with me or don't, but if you walk away right now, you lose the only version of this that ends with your son not knowing his father is in federal custody." The word son landed like a physical thing. She had said it deliberately. She had said it the way Park had said Meridian General, precisely, with full knowledge of what it would do. Marco walked with her. The coffee shop was small, mostly empty at this hour, the post-lunch dead zone. They took a table near the back window. She didn't order anything. Neither did he. She put her phone face down on the table. He noted it, noted that she wanted him to see she wasn't recording, or wanted him to think she wasn't. "You built something real in London," she said. "Task Force isn't interested in London. Task Force is New York, specifically the DeLuca family's financial infrastructure in New York, which your cousin Alfie has been running in ways that are considerably less careful than the way you run things." She looked at him steadily. "Alfie's been sloppy for 2 years. Vincent identified the exposure 8 months ago, and instead of bringing it to you, he made a different calculation." "He went to the task force first," Marco said. "He went to the task force and offered them a roadmap, in exchange for himself being walked out clean." Her voice carried no particular judgment in it. She was reporting facts. "The case they've been building is against Alfie primarily, and 3 other members of the New York operation. You are on the periphery of their target list, Mr. DeLuca, not the center." He looked at her. "You're telling me I'm not the primary target. I'm telling you that what happens to your positioning on that list depends entirely on decisions you make in the next 24 hours. He leaned back. "Park sent you out here." "Park facilitated the introduction," she said. "What I'm offering you is separate from Park's proposal. Park wants corridor access. That's his business. What I'm offering is a different conversation entirely." She picked up her phone, turned it over once, put it back down. "Vincent's testimony gets walked back. The case against the DeLuca operation loses its structural spine. Alfie takes what Alfie has coming, and you, and everything you've built in London, stays outside the radius." "In exchange for what?" Marco said. She looked at him. "Daniel Park," she said. "His network is significantly larger than what he showed you in that restaurant. The logistics infrastructure in Queens, the storage facilities, they're not for import. They're for transit. People, Mr. DeLuca, not product." She held his gaze and didn't let it go. "He moves people." The word people, the specific weight of it. Marco sat with that weight for 3 seconds and felt something shift in the cold architecture behind his eyes. Not softening, not sentiment, but something that was purely about category. There were lines he had spent 20 years not crossing, not from weakness, from choice, from a very specific understanding of what kind of man he was going to be inside the world he had chosen. Daniel Park had just moved from one category to another. "What do you need?" Marco said. "Take the meeting with Park again. Accept his proposal. Get inside the operational detail, the contacts, the corridor specifics, the transit schedules. You know what questions to ask because you know how these structures work." She was precise now, efficient. "You give us what we need to build the case on our end. We handle everything from there." "And Vincent's deal gets restructured. He cooperates fully with the Park case instead. His testimony about the DeLuca operation becomes irrelevant." She paused. "He still walks. That part I can't change." Marco looked at the table. Vincent walks. 6 years. And Vincent walks. He felt the specific pressure of that. Not the grief of it, not yet. That was for a different room in a different time. What he felt right now was the controlled and operational version of fury. The kind that doesn't burn hot. The kind that runs cold and quiet and gets filed under, later. He looked up. "I need something from you first," he said. "What?" "Meridian General, the pediatric department. Whatever surveillance has been in that building, it stops. Today." She looked at him. "There's a woman," he said, "and a child. They are not part of this. They were never part of this. I need your people out of that building, and I need whatever Park thinks he knows about them buried so deep he can't find it again." His voice was level. It was the most level it had been in 4 days. That is non-negotiable. That happens before I walk back into any room with Park. Reyes was quiet for a moment. I can have our surveillance withdrawn within the hour, she said carefully. What Park knows independently. Handle it. Mr. DeLuca, handle it, he said again, or this conversation is the last one we have. She looked at him for a long moment, measuring something, then she nodded. He stood. I'll call Cho, he said. I'll arrange a second meeting with Park for tomorrow morning. You'll have what you need by end of day. He walked out. The afternoon hit him, the noise and movement of Midtown, a bus exhaling at a stop 20 feet away, two men arguing in front of a deli about something that had nothing to do with anything, the ordinary world. He moved through it, and his hands were steady, and his pace was steady, and somewhere in the locked interior of himself, something was running very fast. He walked 3 blocks before he stopped. He stood at the corner and took out his phone and called Lila. She picked up on the second ring. Marco. Where's Miles right now? She heard it in his voice. A pause. Carol's apartment. I sent him there this morning after you left. What happened? He needs to stay there tonight. Can Carol do that? Yes, she can, but... Lila. He pressed his hand flat against the building behind him. Brick. Cold. Real. I'm handling it. I need him off his regular schedule for 1 more day. Can you tell Carol without explaining everything to her? I can tell her it's a family thing. A short silence. Are you okay? The question was so direct and so unguarded that it stopped him for a fraction of a second. The fact of her asking it, the fact that she still could after everything, the fact that they were standing on opposite sides of a phone call that was about protecting their son, and she was asking if he was okay. I will be, he said. I'll call you tonight. He ended the call. He spent the afternoon preparing, not the kind of preparation that involved other people, the kind he did alone, running through every meeting he'd had with Vincent in the past 6 months, cataloging what had been said and when, building the architecture of the breach from the inside out. He did this in the hotel room, jacket off, at the desk, writing nothing down. The information lived in his head where it belonged. By 6 o'clock, he had a clear enough picture that his stomach had stopped doing the thing it had been doing since the sidewalk outside the restaurant, the specific rolling instability of a man who has just learned that the floor has a different shape than he thought it did. The floor had a shape. He knew it now. That was enough to work with. At 6:40, his phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code. He picked up. Marco. The voice was familiar and wrong simultaneously. The voice of a person he had known for years speaking from a context that made the familiarity into something else entirely. It's Vincent. Marco said nothing. I know you met with Park, Vincent said. I know what he showed you. A pause. The sound of traffic behind him. He was outside somewhere. I need you to hear me out. You have 30 seconds, Marco said. Use them. I didn't have a choice. Vincent's voice was tight, controlled. But underneath the control, something was working. Not guilt, not quite, but the close relative of guilt that lives in people who have convinced themselves their choices were inevitable. Alfie was going to bring the whole operation down. The exposure he created, Marco, it was going to be catastrophic. I identified it, and I went to you twice about Alfie. Twice. You told me to handle it internally. So you went federal. I went to people who could actually stop it. You went to people who could walk you out clean, Marco said. His voice was flat. Don't rewrite the math, Vincent. The math doesn't change because you're the one doing it. A silence. What are you going to do? Vincent said. Nothing you need to know about. Marco. Don't call this number again. He ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he stood, put his jacket on, and went to see his uncle. Dominic was out of surgery. The operation had gone well. The surgeon had used the word textbook in a way that was meant to be reassuring and was. And Dominic was in the recovery room, groggy and irritable, and asking for water with the focused urgency of a man whose most immediate problem was thirst. Marco's mother was there, sitting beside the bed, and she looked at Marco when he came in with the look she'd been giving him for 3 days. The one that wasn't asking a question because it already knew the shape of the answer. He sat with them for 2 hours. He held his uncle's hand when the old man fell back asleep. He did not think about Vincent. He did not think about Reyes or Park or corridors or task forces. He sat in the recovery room with the rhythmic evidence of his uncle's continuing heartbeat on the monitor beside the bed, and he let that particular room be what it was. His mother touched his arm when she left at 9. "Stay," she said. "Not to the hospital, to New York." He looked at her. "However this resolves," she said. "Stay." He didn't answer. She left. He sat with Dominic for another hour, and then he walked back to the hotel through the night air, and the city was doing what it did, and he was doing what he did, which was moving forward through it with everything he carried and not showing any of it. He called Lila at 10. "Miles is fine," she said before he could ask. "He's asleep. Carol said he ate a good dinner and was his normal self." A pause. "I told him you might not be at the park tomorrow. He said okay." Something about the way she delivered that last part. Careful, not weaponized, just true. "I'll be there," Marco said. "You don't have to." "I'll be there," he said again. "Whatever happens tomorrow morning, I'll be there by afternoon." A silence. "What happens tomorrow morning?" she said. He told her. Not everything. Not Reyes, not the federal dimension, not the full scope of what was moving. But Park. The second meeting, what he needed to do and why. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You're going to walk into a room with someone who used my son as a threat," she said. "Yes. And you need me to be okay with that. I need you to know what I'm doing and why. Whether you're okay with it is your call." Another silence. He could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was working through something she hadn't decided yet. "Be careful," she said finally. 2 words. He held them. "I will," he said. He ended the call. He set the alarm for 6. He lay back on the hotel bed with the lights on and stared at the ceiling and ran the tomorrow meeting through his head the way he ran every significant meeting, every variable, every exit point, every place the conversation could break and where it would break too. He built it until it was solid, until there were no surprises he hadn't already categorized. Then he turned the lights off. At 6, the alarm went off. He was already awake. He dressed. He ate something from the hotel restaurant that he didn't taste. He called Cho at 8:15. "Tell Park I want to move forward," he said. "Same restaurant, 10 o'clock. "He'll be pleased," Cho said. "One condition. Park comes alone this time. No one at the door." A pause. "That's unusual." "It's my condition," Marco said. "If he wants what he's asking for, he comes alone." He ended the call. At 9:15, he walked to the restaurant. He got there at 9:40, sat at the same corner table, ordered water. At 10:02, Park walked in, alone. He sat across from Marco. He looked at him with the direct assessment he'd used the day before, reading Marco the way experienced people read each other, looking for the shift, the tell, the thing that said the dynamic had changed. He was good. Marco gave him that. He almost didn't see it. "You've thought it through," Park said. "I have." "And?" "I need the corridor details before I agree to anything structural," Marco said. "Transit schedules, contact points, the operational layer." He kept his voice collaborative, kept it forward-leaning, kept it in the register of a man making a business decision. "I'm not signing on to a framework I can't fully evaluate." Park looked at him. For 3 seconds, something moved behind the man's eyes. Not suspicion exactly. The precursor to it. The checking. Marco held the look without blinking, without shifting, without giving him anything. Park reached a decision. He reached inside his jacket, and Marco's phone vibrated once in his pocket. A single buzz. The signal Reyes had said she would send when her people were in position outside. Park placed a folded document on the table. Transit schedules. Contact points. The operational layer of a network that moved people instead of product, written in the clean, neutral language of logistics, the horror of it hidden inside the vocabulary of supply chains. Marco reached for it. His hand was completely steady. He opened the document and began to read, and with the other hand, beneath the table, he opened the voice memo on his phone that he had started running at 9:55 and had been running for 7 minutes, and he let Daniel Park's operational infrastructure speak for itself into the microphone in his jacket pocket while the afternoon light came through the restaurant windows and the espresso machine ran its noise and the ordinary world went on. Being ordinary around something that was not ordinary at all. He read through the full document. 3 minutes. 4. He turned each page with deliberate care, noting what he was noting, filing what he was filing, giving Park the experience of a man being convinced. He turned the last page. He looked up. Park was watching him with the particular composure of a man who believes he has won. "Well," Park said. Marco looked at him across the table. He thought about the photograph of Vincent in the parking garage. He thought about Reyes on the sidewalk saying the word people with the specific weight she had put behind it. He thought about Miles at the railing in Riverside Park, gripping the metal with both hands, leaning forward to see further than he could currently see. "I have a question," Marco said. "Ask it." The 3 storage facilities in Queens. Marco put the document down, flat on the table. "What's the current load?" Park's composure didn't move. Not a millimeter. He was good. But his left hand, resting on the table beside his water glass, pressed slightly into the tablecloth. Marco saw it. "Transit pause right now," Park said evenly. "Nothing moving until the corridor arrangement is confirmed." "So they're holding." "Logistics pause. Standard." "How many?" Park's jaw moved. "Mr. DeLuca." "How many people are in those facilities right now?" Marco said. His voice had dropped. Not in volume, so just in temperature. Dropping from the collaborative register into something else entirely, something older and more fundamental, the voice that came out when Marco DeLuca was done performing and had arrived at the actual thing. Park looked at him. The composure was still there, but something had shifted behind it, a recalculation happening in real time. The moment when an intelligent man understands that the room he is in is not the room he thought he was in. "We don't need to Yes or no," Marco said. "Are there people in those buildings right now?" Park said nothing. That was the answer. Marco's hand came up from beneath the table and placed his phone on the surface between them, face up. The red recording indicator visible, 7 minutes and 43 seconds and counting. Park looked at the phone. He looked at Marco. Outside the restaurant's front window, 2 black vehicles that had not been there 10 minutes ago were now parked at the curb. One of them had government plates. Park's eyes moved to the window. Back to Marco. To the phone. Back to Marco. Something moved across his face that Marco did not have a name for and did not particularly want to name. The specific expression of a man who has spent years being the one holding the information and has just understood in real time that he is not holding it anymore. "The facilities," Marco said quietly. "Tell them to open the doors." Park's jaw worked. "Now," Marco said, "before Reyes comes through that door and it becomes something you can't control. Right now, you can control it. Call your people and tell them to open the doors." The restaurant around them was ordinary. The espresso machine ran. Someone at the bar laughed at something. The light through the windows was clean and flat and without mercy. Park reached inside his jacket for his phone. His hand was not steady. He made the call in Korean, short and clipped, 3 sentences, and ended it. He put the phone on the table. He did not look at Marco. Marco picked up his own phone, sent a single text to a number Reyes had given him that morning. Done. He slid the folded document across the table toward Park. "Keep it," he said. He stood. He put on his jacket. He looked down at Daniel Park, who was sitting very still in a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, holding the knowledge of what the next hour of his life was going to look like, and Marco looked at him with the particular expression of a man who has made a decision he will not revisit and moved on to what comes after the decision. "You shouldn't have mentioned the pediatric wing," Marco said. He walked toward the door. Behind him, the front entrance opened. Reyes came in with 2 others, badges already out, and Marco moved past them and through the door without slowing, into the afternoon, into the noise and movement of the city, the air cold and clean against his face after the recycled warmth of the restaurant. He did not look back. He walked half a block, stopped, leaned against the building and pressed both hands flat against the brick and breathed. Slow in, slow out. The specific decompression of a man who has been holding every surface of himself absolutely rigid for 45 minutes and is now allowing the rigidity to release by degrees. Careful, controlled, because releasing it all at once would mean something he wasn't going to allow on a public street. His phone buzzed. Reyes. A text. "Queens facilities confirmed. responding units en route. He read it. He put the phone in his pocket. He stood against the brick wall of a midtown building and let the afternoon move around him and thought about a boy at a railing looking at the river. And the thought was not complicated, and it was not abstracted, and it had no empire in it at all, and it was the clearest thing he had thought in. He pushed off the wall. He had somewhere to be. Riverside Park. 4 o'clock. He started walking. What? He walked the whole way. 40-some blocks from Midtown down to the west side, and he walked all of them because the walking was the only thing that felt honest right now, the only thing his body could do that matched the speed at which everything inside him was moving. Cabs passed. The subway was underneath him somewhere, running its routes. He walked anyway, hands in his jacket pockets, the cold air coming off the river as he turned west, finding the gaps in his coat. By the time he reached Riverside Park, the light had shifted to late afternoon gold, the kind of light that makes New York look like a painting of itself, and he stood at the entrance on 83rd and checked his watch. 3:52. He went in. He walked the path slowly, following the curve of it toward the river, and he thought about nothing specific, which was unusual for him. Usually his mind ran parallel processes, the operational layer, the people layer, the risk calculation layer, all of it running simultaneously beneath whatever conversation he was having with the surface world. Right now there was only the path and the light and the sound of the river below the embankment and the distant noise of children somewhere ahead. He heard Miles before he saw him. The boy was laughing at something, a full-body laugh, the kind that doesn't know it's being heard, and the sound of it moved through Marco in a way he didn't try to name or contain. He just let it come. He came around the curve of the path, and there they were. Lila was sitting on the bench by the railing. Miles was not at the railing today. He was running a circuit around 3 benches in a row, a game with internal rules that were not immediately obvious to anyone watching, touching each bench in a specific sequence and then running back. He had the Triceratops in one hand, and the game apparently required the Triceratops to touch each bench too, which complicated the logistics considerably. Lila saw Marco first. She stood, not with alarm. She had known he was coming. She was expecting him, but with the particular attention of someone who has been waiting and is now reading the arrival, reading what the person who just walked through that gate is carrying and whether it's more or less than what they left with. She read him for a moment. Then she sat back down. He sat beside her. Not close. The distance of 2 people who have not yet negotiated what the distance should be. "It's done," he said. She looked at the river. "Park," she said. "Federal custody by now. His operation is being dismantled." He paused. "The people in those facilities, there were 11 of them in 3 buildings. They're out." Lila was quiet for a moment. 11 people. Yes, she absorbed that. He could see the doctor in her doing it, the clinical processing of a number, the human weight behind it, the particular way she categorized information about suffering. She had spent years developing that, the ability to hold both the number and the weight behind it without one destroying the other. Miles came around the circuit. He saw Marco and his stride broke into something faster, more direct, the game immediately abandoned for the new information in his environment. "Marco," he said, arriving at the bench slightly out of breath. "You came." "I said I would." Miles accepted this as the natural order. He climbed up onto the bench between them, the Triceratops balanced on his knee, and looked at the river with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who has claimed this view and is pleased to share it. "That boat is the same one from yesterday," he said, pointing. Marco looked. "How do you know it's the same one? It has a red thing on the side." Miles pointed more specifically. "See? Red thing." Marco looked. There was, in fact, a red marking on the side of the vessel moving slowly upriver. "You're right," he said. Miles seemed deeply satisfied by this confirmation. He settled back against the bench and held the Triceratops against his chest and watched the boat move, and Marco watched it with him, and beside him Lila sat with her hands in her lap, and the 3 of them were quiet for a moment that stretched longer than moments usually do, a moment that had weight and texture and the particular quality of things that are happening for the first time and cannot be repeated in the same form. "His name is Miles because—" Lila started and then stopped. Marco looked at her. She was looking at the river. Her voice, when it came back, was lower, more careful. The hospital I trained at, my first residency. There was a child, a patient, 7 years old. He didn't make it. She paused. His name was Miles. He was the first patient I lost, the first one I couldn't fix. She pressed her hands together in her lap. I decided if I ever had a son, I would name him after someone I couldn't save, so I would never forget why I do it. Marco looked at her. He looked at the boy beside him watching the boat. You named him after someone you lost, he said. I named him after someone who reminded me that I'm not doing this for the wins, she said. I'm doing it for the ones where I have to keep trying even when I know the outcome. She said it simply. No weight added. No instruction in it. Just what it was. Marco looked back at the river. He understood what she was telling him. Not about medicine. She was not talking about medicine. They sat for another few minutes, and Miles asked if boats had drivers. And Marco said yes, and Miles asked what the driver's name was for that particular boat, and Marco said he didn't know, and Miles said someone should find out. Lila said that was probably true. Miles seemed to decide this was a project for another day and returned his attention to the Triceratops. At 5 o'clock, Lila said it was time for dinner. Miles climbed down from the bench. He looked up at Marco with the direct clarity that had been there every time. Will you come tomorrow? He said. Marco looked at Lila. She was watching him, not giving him the answer, not making it easier, just watching, the way she had been watching everything, reading it, filing it, deciding what it meant. I'll come tomorrow, Marco said. Miles nodded like this was the expected and correct response and walked ahead down the path toward the gate, the Triceratops swinging from one hand. Lila and Marco stood. They walked behind him, not quite side by side, not quite at a distance, the in-between. At the gate, Lila caught Miles's hand and he allowed it. She looked at Marco. My apartment, she said. 7 o'clock. Bring food. Miles likes noodles, any kind, he's not particular. She paused, the edge of something almost becoming a smile, and then not quite getting there. We need to talk, properly. Not crisis talking, actually talking. Okay, he said. She walked through the gate with her son. Marco stood at the entrance to the park and watched them until they turned the corner at the end of the block. Miles walking with his full body forward momentum, Lila's hand loose in his, and then they were gone, and the street was just a street again. He bought noodles from a restaurant 2 blocks from her building. 3 containers. He didn't know exactly what variety to get, so he got 3 different ones, which he was aware was excessive and did not fix. He stood in the lobby of her building at 6:58 while the doorman called up. He stood straight and held the bag and breathed. She buzzed him through. 3rd floor, he knocked. She opened the door, still in the clothes she'd been wearing in the park, her hair down, and she looked at the bag in his hand and at the quantity of containers he was carrying, and something moved across her face that was definitively, briefly, the edge of a smile. She held the door. How many people are you feeding? She said. I didn't know which kind. He likes all of them. Good. He came in. The apartment was the same organized warmth, the drawings on the refrigerator, the stacked books, the particular smell of a place that had been lived in by specific people who had made it theirs. He set the food on the kitchen counter. From the back of the apartment came the sound of a bath running. He's in the bath, Lila said. He'll be out in 10 minutes, and he will eat everything, and then he will need to be reminded 3 times that it's a school night, and then he will fall asleep on the couch within 4 minutes of lying down, because he always does. She poured 2 glasses of water and handed him one. That's the next 2 hours. Okay, he said. She leaned back against the counter, looked at him. Vincent, she said. His arrangement with the task force gets restructured around the park case. He cooperates with that investigation instead. Marco held the glass. He walks. I can't change that part. She was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? Like it's the arrangement that protects the most important things. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. She was looking back at him with full attention, the same attention she gave everything, and he understood that she was asking him to be honest in the specific and costly way that honesty sometimes required. I feel like he took 6 years of trust and used it as currency, Marco said, and I feel like the version of me that is angry about that has to wait behind the version of me that has more important things to focus on. He paused. That's as honest as I can make it right now. She nodded slowly. The London operation, she said. After all this, the restructuring you mentioned, what does that look like? 18 months of rebuilding, new contacts, different channels? He set his glass down, smaller for a while. Are you going back? The question was careful, precise. It wasn't asking what she looked like she was asking, or it was, but it was also asking something more specific. Something about the shape of the next thing, about what the next thing was going to be made of. I have to go back, he said. There are things I have to close out in person. 6 weeks, maybe 8. He looked at her. And then I'm coming back. She held his gaze. To New York, she said. Yes. For miles. For miles, he said. And for whatever else is here. The last part was undefended. He said it without building a structure around it, without the careful positioning he usually applied to things that mattered too much to leave unprotected. He said it and let it sit in the kitchen air between them, just what it was. Lila looked at him for a long moment. She was doing her own arithmetic. He could see it, running her own calculation the way she'd been running it since the coffee shop at Whitmore's, since the park, since the moment in the pediatric corridor when she saw him standing at the end of the hallway and her body went still before her mind had finished deciding what to do. She was not a woman who made decisions she hadn't fully processed. She had not survived what she had survived by taking leaps she couldn't see the landing of. He did not rush her. He had done enough of the wrong kind of rushing in this situation. I don't know what else is here, she said finally. I don't know if there is an else. I know that you're his father, and I know that he wants you here, and I know that what I watched you do this week. She stopped. Reset. I know it wasn't nothing. It wasn't nothing, he agreed. I also know that I have a life. My career. This department. This city. She crossed her arms loosely. I rebuilt everything here from scratch, Marco. I'm not relocating that. I'm not asking you to, he said. I'm coming back here. That's what I'm telling you. She looked at him. You'd leave London, she said. I'd change London. Keep what makes sense to keep. Build what needs to be built differently. He held her gaze. I've been running an empire. I can run a smaller operation from anywhere with a phone and a flight. The question was always where I wanted to land. He paused. I know where I want to land. From the back of the apartment, the bath sounds changed. The water draining, the small percussion of a child getting out. Miles's voice, talking to himself, or to the Triceratops, or to no one in particular, a private narrative she would probably not understand even if she could hear it clearly. Lila uncrossed her arms. 6 to 8 weeks, she said. I'll call every day. Miles will hold you to that. Good. She looked at him once more with the full weight attention that she applied to things she was making decisions about. Then she turned to the containers on the counter and started opening them. And the act of it, the ordinary domestic act of opening takeout containers in a kitchen, was so specifically, brutally normal after the last 4 days that Marco stood very still for a moment, just letting it be what it was. Miles came out in pajamas with dinosaurs on them, the same pair as the morning, freshly washed. He assessed the situation immediately. Marco in the kitchen, food on the counter, his mother opening containers. You brought noodles, he said to Marco. I brought 3 kinds. Miles came to the counter and looked at them with professional seriousness, weighing the options. That one, he said, pointing. And also that one. Good choices, Marco said. How do you know? Miles said. I don't. You probably know better than I do. Miles considered this fairly. Yes, he said. I do. They ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, Miles eating with the full commitment of a child who has used a significant amount of physical energy and is now replenishing it with complete focus. He asked Marco 3 questions about London with the rapid-fire follow-up structure of someone who has decided a topic is worth investigating. Was it cold there? Did they have dinosaur museums? Were the boats on the river the same as New York boats or different boats? Marco answered every question with the same seriousness Miles had applied to asking them. After dinner, Lila told Miles it was a school night, and Miles said it didn't feel like a school night, and she said that was how school nights worked, and he accepted this with the equanimity of someone who has learned that certain categories of argument are not worth the energy. He climbed onto the couch. He arranged the Triceratops on the cushion beside him. He looked at Marco. Will you be here when I wake up? He said. The question was practical, direct. Children asked the questions they needed the answers to without the social softening that adults learned to put around them. And this was the question Miles needed the answer to. Will the new person still be here? Or is this another thing that goes away? Marco looked at Lila. She looked back, not giving it to him, his to answer. He looked at Miles. Not tomorrow morning, he said. I have somewhere to be in the morning. He held the boy's eyes. But I'll be back in the afternoon, and I'll come back after that. Miles processed this. Okay, he said. He lay down on the couch and pulled a blanket up and was asleep in the time it took Marco and Lila to carry the containers to the counter. They stood in the kitchen listening to his breathing even out. 4 minutes, Lila said quietly. Every time. Every time? Since he was 2. He fights it for exactly the right amount of time and then he just... She made a small gesture. Gone. I used to watch him do it and wonder where he went. If it was good, wherever he went. Marco looked at the sleeping child on the couch. I think it's good, he said. She looked at him. Then she reached past him and put the remaining container in the refrigerator, and the small practical act of it closed the domestic evening in a way that felt finished, complete, a thing that had run its course to a natural resting point. She walked him to the door. They stood in the hallway, the door half open, the apartment behind her warm and lit, the corridor outside cooler and quieter. Dominic, she said, goes home in another week if his numbers hold. My mother will handle him from there. He paused. He'd like to meet Miles. Something moved through her face, complex, too many things at once to be named individually. Eventually, she said. Eventually is fine. She leaned against the door frame. She looked tired. Not broken, not diminished, just tired in the way that people get when they have been operating at full capacity for a long time and have finally arrived somewhere that might possibly allow them to operate at something less than maximum. I need you to understand something, she said. Okay. I'm not waiting, she said. I'm not going to wait for you to come back and then build something around whether you do or don't show up the way you say you will. I've been building without waiting for 4 years. I'll keep building without waiting. She held his gaze. If you come back and you do what you're saying, you'll find something here. I'm not promising you what it is yet, but something. She paused. And if you don't come back, or if you come back and you're only half present the way you were always half present before, I know, he said. Miles doesn't get to go through losing someone twice. I know. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. What he had been 5 years ago was one kind of person. That person had stood in an airport and made a calculation and boarded a flight and built an empire and told himself the calculation had been right and had kept telling himself that right up until a hospital corridor in the Upper West Side recalculated everything in about 40 seconds flat. He was not that person now, not entirely, not in the ways that mattered most. He knew the difference between transformation and declaration. He was not standing in this hallway declaring himself transformed. He was standing here knowing what the next 18 months of his life had to look like and why. And the why was sleeping on a couch with a triceratops and had asked him if he'd be there in the morning with the particular directness of a child who had already learned that some people were and some people weren't. He was going to be. That was not a declaration. It was a decision. Decisions he knew how to make. Decisions he knew how to keep. Good night, Lila, he said. She looked at him once more. One last full-weight look, the kind she gave to things she was committing to memory. Good night, she said. She closed the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he walked to the elevator, rode it down, walked through the lobby past the doorman who nodded at him, stepped out into the night air. He stood on the sidewalk outside her building on West 88th Street and looked up at the sky above the city, which was not a sky you could see stars in. Too much light, too much density of human activity pushing back against the dark, but which was present above him nonetheless, deep and permanent behind the glow. He stood there for a little while, not planning, not calculating, not running scenarios or building structures or mapping the operational landscape of what came next, just standing on a sidewalk in New York in the cold night air, a man who had arrived in this city 4 days ago for one reason and was leaving it, eventually, in 6 weeks or 8, carrying something he had not expected to carry and could not put down and did not want to. He thought about Miles asking what the driver's name was on that boat. Someone should find out. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and started walking. He called his mother at 10:30. She answered on the second ring, and he could hear in her voice that she had been awake, that she had been waiting. "I need to tell you something," he said. She was quiet, ready. "You have a grandson," he said. "His name is Miles. He's 4 years old." He paused. "He has Dominic's forehead, and he has a dinosaur named after a horn configuration. He explained to me in significant detail. You're going to like him." Silence. Then his mother made a sound he had not heard her make in 20 years. Not a cry, not quite. Something softer and more private than that. The sound of a woman receiving something she had stopped believing would come. "Marco," she said. "I know." "How long?" "4 years." Another silence. "She raised him alone," he said. "She raised him well. She's extraordinary, Ma. I know you'll have things to say about what happened. Save them. She doesn't need them, and neither do I." He paused. "What I need is for you to understand that this is what's here, and it's good, and I'm not leaving it again." His mother breathed. "Okay," she said. "Just that." "Okay." He walked the rest of the way to the hotel in the cold, and the city moved around him with its cabs and its pedestrians and its particular late-night register. And he moved through it with everything he was carrying, which was considerable, and which was, for the first time in years, not exclusively made of things that kept him awake. He would see Dominic in the morning. He would begin the process of restructuring what needed to be restructured. The calls, the contacts, the careful architectural work of building something different from the ruins of what the last week had dismantled. He would do it methodically and without self-pity, because that was the only way things got done. In 6 weeks, he would come back. He would knock on the door of an apartment on West 88th Street, and a boy in dinosaur pajamas would open it and ask him some version of a question about boats or dinosaurs, or the specific taxonomy of pigeons. And Marco DeLuca, who had built his life on silence and control and the discipline of not wanting things he couldn't protect, would answer it. He would keep answering it, for as long as Miles needed someone to ask. He got to the hotel. He went upstairs. He did not turn the television on. He sat at the desk by the window with the dark city below him and a piece of hotel stationery in front of him that he did not write anything on. He just sat with it. The stationery, the window, the city. He sat there until the first gray light of morning came in at the edges of the curtains, and the city below shifted its register from nighttime to morning, from one version of itself to the next, the way cities do, the way people do, the way things do when they have run as far as they can go in one direction, and the only remaining move is to turn. He did not sleep. But for the first time in 5 years, the waking was not empty. It had a name in it, Miles. And underneath that name, quieter and more careful and not yet fully spoken, something else he was not ready to say out loud but was done pretending was not there. He would be back in 6 weeks. He would knock on that door. And this time, for the first time, he would stay.